If you look at a map of Russia, you'll notice a very striking feature. Russia spans 11 time zones and 2 continents. From the ice-covered Arctic region in the north, to the desert steppes bordering Kazakhstan in the south, from the Baltic Sea in the west, to the Pacific Ocean in the east. Its territory is so vast that it occupies a prominent position on the world map. But the most interesting point is this. Nearly 80% of Russia's population lives on just 20% of its land area, while the rest of the country remains sparsely populated. Why does this happen? To answer these questions, we must understand Russia's geographical environment, historical development, and political landscape. Because behind this unusual population distribution lie countless untold stories. If we divide Russia into its European and Asian parts, you'll find an interesting phenomenon. The European part covers only about 23% of the country's area, but is home to 80% of its population, while the Asian part, known as Siberia or the Far East, occupies about 75% of the land, but remains largely uninhabited. Russia's capital, Moscow, and its cultural center, St. Petersburg, are both located in the European part. Most of the country's railway network, industrial bases, and political institutions are also concentrated in this western region. So why have Russians always been reluctant to migrate and settle in the east? To understand this, we need to go back a few hundred years. Originally, Russia was not as vast as it is today. At that time, the land was only inhabited by scattered Slavic tribes, mainly in what is now western Russia and northern Ukraine. Why did they settle there? The land was fertile, and the climate was mild. But on the other side of the Ural Mountains, the situation was completely different. When the Russian Empire began to expand, it tried to encourage people to migrate eastward and settle there. But survival in those regions was extremely difficult. Siberia has an intensely cold climate, with ice and snow covering the landscape. In Europe, cities could easily be built along rivers. But in Siberia, the harsh cold made it hard to grow crops, and establishing settlements was even more challenging. During the Soviet era, the situation began to change. In the early 20th century, Soviet leadership formulated plans to develop the East and promote population migration, particularly to Siberia and the Far East. From the 1920s to the 1950s, millions of people were sent east. At the same time, the Soviet Union began building new cities and industrial centers in the east, often located near oil fields, coal mines, and military facilities. The core objectives were twofold. First, to turn Siberia's resources into the engine of the Soviet economy. And second, to strengthen control over this vast region. The most grand project of this period was the Trans-Siberian Railway. Completed and fully operational by 1916. It stretches from Moscow in the west to the Pacific port city of Vladivostok in the east, spanning over 9.000 kilometers, making it the longest railway line in the world. Its construction aimed to connect Russia's eastern regions with its western core, which was a monumental achievement at the time, and contributed to some extent to the development of Siberia. But even with new cities and railway networks, few Russians were willing to settle in these regions. The most fundamental natural reason is that Western Russia is simply too comfortable to live in. The European part of Russia has always been a livable area, with a mild climate, flat and fertile land, and favorable conditions for development, particularly the region known as the Black Earth Belt, with soil fertility ranking among the best in the world, covering areas like Kursk, Voronezh, and Belgorod. This fertile land is ideal for growing wheat, rye, and sunflowers. About 70% of Russia's grain is produced here. At the same time, major rivers like the Volga and Neva have historically been vital trade routes. The Volga, the longest river in Europe, flows through more than 11 Russian cities, including Kazan, Nizhny Novgorod, and Volgograd, before emptying into the Caspian Sea, providing immense convenience for irrigation and transportation. More importantly, this region is close to Europe, enabling easy access to European trade, culture, and modern infrastructure. Russia's two most important cities, Moscow and St. Petersburg, are located here, with a combined population of nearly 20 million. This area boasts well-developed road networks, high-quality healthcare systems, abundant job opportunities, and excellent educational resources. Most of Russia's business elites and government institutions are also concentrated here, attracting professionals and students from across the country. Even during the Soviet era, the Western region was prioritized for development. The Russian elite, including government officials and intellectuals, mostly settled in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and the vast majority of Soviet investment flowed into these two cities. This development model continues to this day. Even now, the average salary in Moscow is twice the national average. This has led to a stark development gap within Russia. The West is the country's economic and political center, while Siberia and the Far East lag far behind. The core reason for this disparity is the harsh living conditions in the East. Siberia is notorious for its extreme cold. Take Yakutsk, the coldest city in the world, as an example. Temperatures there often drop below -60 degrees Celsius. Rivers remain frozen for most of the year. Summers are short and humid, and mosquitoes are rampant. Cities here are few and far between, separated by vast forests, mountains, and permafrost. Infrastructure is lacking, and agricultural development is nearly impossible. On the other hand, Siberia is also a treasure trove of natural resources. About 80% of Russia's natural gas reserves, and 70% of its oil reserves are concentrated in Siberia. A significant portion of the natural gas consumed in Europe also comes from here. Siberia is also home to Lake Baikal, the deepest lake in the world, with a depth of up to 1.600 meters. Even more astonishing, Lake Baikal holds about 20% of the world's freshwater resources. Additionally, Siberia contains about 40% of Russia's coal reserves, as well as vast gold and diamond deposits. For example, the Sukhoi Log gold deposit in Yakutia is one of the largest undeveloped gold mines in the world, with reserves of up to 450 tons. The region is also rich in oil shale resources, making Russia the world's fifth largest oil producer. However, there is a major challenge. The cost of extracting these resources is extremely high. Take the Arctic region, for example. The climate is freezing, the ice is thick, and even reaching the extraction sites is a formidable task. Add to that the lack of roads, and transporting drilling equipment becomes even more difficult. Therefore, extracting oil here is far more expensive than in regions like the Middle East or the United States. Under such harsh conditions, most people who live in Siberia are workers in the oil, gas, or mining industries. Once their work contracts end, the majority choose to leave, resulting in numerous ghost towns across Siberia. The Russian government has tried to address this issue by offering policies such as free land, tax breaks, and even cash subsidies to attract people to move east. But most people decline, for a simple reason. It's freezing cold, cities are remote, and even basic necessities like schools, hospitals, and internet access are hard to come by. Life here is just too tough. Another important reason for this population distribution is Russia's severe shortage of warm water ports. This issue has long constrained Russia's economic, trade, and military development. Most of Russia's coastline is either frozen for much of the year, or located far from major global shipping routes. The Arctic Ocean in the north is frozen for about 9 months a year, making trade activities almost impossible. Although climate change has opened up some Arctic routes, navigating these passages is both highly risky and costly. While Russia's eastern region borders the Pacific and has important ports like Vladivostok, the problem is that Vladivostok is over 9.000 kilometers from Moscow. Located at the far eastern end of Siberia, even this warm water port often freezes in winter, requiring icebreakers to keep it navigable. Thus, although this port is important, Russia's reliance on it is limited. Russia's most convenient access to warm water seas is through the Black Sea into the Mediterranean. But here too, there is a critical weakness. For Russian ships to enter the Mediterranean, they must pass through the Turkish-controlled Bosporus and Dardanelles Straits. Turkey is a NATO member, and if a conflict were to break out between Russia and NATO, Turkey could block these strategic choke points at any time, cutting off Russia's access to the Atlantic and global trade routes. It is precisely due to the limitations of warm water ports that Russia's population, infrastructure, and industry are highly concentrated in the western region. But from another perspective, Russia's vast and sparsely populated land is also its greatest advantage. On the surface, the low population density in the east may seem like a weakness for Russia. But in reality, this vast, uninhabited land provides Russia with enormous strategic buffer space. If an enemy attempts to attack from the east, they would have to traverse hundreds of kilometers of forests, rivers, and mountains before reaching Russia's core cities. This gives Russia ample time to deploy defenses and plan counterattacks. This is not just theoretical. History provides vivid examples. During World War II, Nazi Germany attacked the Soviet Union from the west. As German forces advanced, the Soviet Red Army employed a strategy of tactical retreat, gradually drawing the Germans deep into Russian territory. German supply lines stretched thinner and thinner, and coupled with Russia's harsh winter, German soldiers grew exhausted and demoralized. At that point, the Soviet Red Army mobilized its forces and launched a full-scale counteroffensive, driving the Germans back. This strategy remains effective even today, because Russia's geographical environment poses a massive challenge to any invading force. During the Cold War, most of the Soviet Union's military bases and radar stations were located in Siberia. These facilities were deliberately built in remote areas, making them difficult to detect and target. Siberia also served as a hidden deployment zone for Soviet bombers and nuclear weapons, keeping them out of the enemy's reach. Thus, Russia's seemingly desolate east is far from useless. It not only provides Russia with time to recuperate and prepare for war, but also offers an excellent space to conceal strategic weapons. So, returning to the initial question, why do 80% of Russians prefer to live on just 20% of the land? The answer is simple. Nature made the West more livable, and the East more challenging. But this seemingly barren land is not just a burden for Russia. It is also its hidden strength. Because this land not only safeguards Russia's security, but also holds the precious resources that elevate Russia to the status of a world power. Today, technology and transportation have advanced significantly. It takes only about 8 hours to fly from Moscow to Vladivostok, and the internet covers most of the country. Yet, even so, the fundamental logic of daily life remains unchanged. In the European part of Russia, cities are closely connected. Trains speed back and forth. Shops are filled with goods. And infrastructure such as schools, hospitals, and roads is readily available. In eastern Russia, although there are large cities like Novosibirsk and Yekaterinburg, where life is relatively convenient, venturing further east reveals a rapid deterioration in living conditions. Countless young people who moved from the east to the west for education or work never return. The birth rate in the eastern regions continues to decline, and the population is aging rapidly. While the west sees continuous population growth, the east grows increasingly desolate. Even though this land is rich in resources, it cannot easily reverse this trend. In the end, Russia is like a giant leaning to one side. All its strength and developmental vitality are concentrated in the western region, while the future of the east remains uncertain.